Magic pagan dirt. We've written about this phenomena, magic pagan dirt, in our book, Northern Paganism Exposing Abraham. It is dirt that pagans, according to modern history, as presented to us by the victors, puts on every one of our pagan ancestors to make them appear more savage, barbaric. They have this dirt on their body that even if they just come out of the water, it seems like they're still dirty. It's their subliminal messaging that your pagans' ancestors were dirty, physically dirty. That's a point I'm going to return to, because that is a false history. I'm going to go to the United States Constitution. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there's a lot of talk about gun buybacks and gun confiscation, and there's also talk of a tax per gun. Tax per gun. So there's a word in there, and that word is infringed. Looked in one etymology source, and it says to break into. So the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms shall not be broken into. Looked on an online etymology source, and it means to violate, to damage, break off, break, or bruise. It comes from a Proto-Indo-European root of bhreg, to break, meaning encroach. Any taxation, any law passed is an infringement, an encroachment. It's a breaking into. If you say you're going to own a gun, and the government, therefore, because you own that gun, can tax you, they are encroaching on your right to bear arms, your Second Amendment right, which does not need to be there. I've made a video about this. That Second Amendment does not need to be there. The Founding Fathers argued about this in the Federalist Papers against the Anti-Federalists, where the Founding Fathers said that what is written in the Constitution is all the federal or central government has. So therefore, anything not delegated specifically in that Constitution is retained by the people. Retained by the people. So the Anti-Federalist says, well, that may be all well and good, but we want a Bill of Rights anyways. And so therefore, the Second Amendment was born. Now, I have a problem with people saying these are our God-given rights, because which God? Which God? Pagans have many of them. Is it Tyr? Is it Odin? Our Havamal addresses having your weapons close by for when you need them, not to be caught in the field without your weapon. The problem is they're not referring to a pantheon. They are referring to the invented Abrahamic God of the Bible. These are our God-given rights. That's what they say. Well, take that God out of the equation. Then where do the rights come from? That's the problem they create. Their God is invented. These are not God-given rights. These rights are inherent to being here, to breathing, to being a human being that is living in this era. That's it. And they cannot be encroached upon. There is a history that is given that has dulled the minds of the masses to the point where they have become passive and accepting of government dictates of what a school system, higher education teaches them, as long as that system is in line with their beliefs and makes them feel good. It makes them feel good. Because for centuries, these same people that are saying these are our God-given rights have tried to take a moral high ground while painting our pagan ancestors as less than. And when you read back through history, it is the opposite. Our pagan ancestors were more than. They had a higher sense of morality and virtue. But history is written by the victors, so that was all switched. These cults of Abraham like to paint the picture that our pagan ancestors en masse just fell on their knees when Christianity held up the cross. That's not the way it happened. Not at all the way it happened. Now, let me return to the magic pagan dirt, because this is another area of history that has been flipped to make our ancestors appear less than. And every human being has pagan ancestry. When you rewind the clock, every human being on the face of this planet came from pagan ancestors. So, there is a massacre that took place in England. The massacre of St. Brice's Day. Now, if you look that up, you're going to see some serious bias, in my opinion, interjected by the writer or the speaker. And that bias is a Christian bias. Keep the narrative flowing. And the bias tends toward that they don't want it to be a massacre including women and children. They want it to be a massacre of warrior men only. It makes them look better. So there is a chronicle of John of Wallingford. Now, John of Wallingford was an English monk and abbot of St. Albans Abbey. He lived in the 13th century, 1200s. One source that I found, and I'll attach the link in the description so you can read it in its entirety. A little over halfway down the page, after he talks about different archaeological discoveries and discounts one, not wholesale, but probably, and he tries to come back around and say that the massacre was probably not of women and children, but he gives an original source in here. So I'll just pick it up, top of the paragraph, because it's halfway down the page. However, while this may be the truth of the St. Brice's Day massacre, which, by the way, happened on November 13th, the year 1002 of the Common Era. So if you're looking for a day to commemorate to your pagan ancestors, that may be a good date, November 13th. So, again, however, while this may be the truth of the St. Brice's Day massacre, a limited action intended to neutralize the threat of Danish mercenaries. So he's beginning to eliminate the women and children. The next paragraph says, the earliest account of St. Brice's Day that accords with the erroneous image of genocidal violence that seems to have become attached to the event is found in a passage of William of Jumage's Deeds of the Norman Dukes, composed circa 1050. Here, Ethelred the Unready, or Ethelred the Inept, we'll just call him Biden, is accused of defiling the kingdom by murdering in a single day without charging them of any crime. The Danes, who lived peacefully and harmoniously throughout the kingdom and who did not fear at all for their lives. William speaks of Danish women being killed by packs of dogs, of their children being crushed to death. Acts at odds with the Chronicles, the Charter, and the Viking mass burials found at Oxford and Dorset, which overwhelmingly contained adult males. Now he goes back to those archaeological finds that he earlier reduces them in importance. So, a massacre, because you find one or two old graves with archaeological evidence in them, does not mean that that is the totality of the evidence. It means you found a portion of the evidence. And these people, these Danes, ran into this one church, which was then lit on fire, and the people were burned inside. A Holocaust inside the church. They say that because there was no women and children found in there, that therefore the whole entire massacre did not involve women and children. So then we go to this monk, this 13th century monk, John of Wallingford. And this excerpt that I'm going to take is from the Church Historians of England, Volume 2, Part 2. And it's got several different chronicles in there. Now, this is speaking about the Danes. On page 558, it says, quote, they had also either seized or prepared to seize all the best towns in the island, and caused much trouble to the natives of the land, for they were wont, after the fashion of their country, to comb their hair every day, to bathe every Saturday, to change their garments often, and set off their person by many such frivolous devices. In this manner they laid siege to the virtue of the married women, and persuaded the daughters even of the nobles to be their concubines. For these and other like causes there arose many quarrels and wars in the realm. So much for magic, pagan dirt. Our pagan ancestors bathed, they changed their clothes, they wore ornaments, jewelry. History needs to be revised. But let's continue, because then this monk, so here we have a Christian writing history for the church, and he's talking about St. Brice's Day massacre. For these and other like causes there arose many quarrels and wars in the realm. The king, however, smoothed the matter over, because the Danes were always in the wrong. At length, from the constant influx of their countrymen, they had so increased in numbers and strength that they paid but little respect to the king, so that at last he was so provoked by the numerous complaints arising from their insolence that he gave them all up to the English to be dealt with as they might think fit. But the plot did not turn out well, for not fearing the judgment of God and counseling but badly for their own safety, they agreed together that each province should kill the Danes at the time resident within its limits. And they appointed a certain day on which they should rise up against them. This day was the Saturday, on which, as has been before said, the Danes are in the habit of bathing. And accordingly, at the set time, they were destroyed most ruthlessly, from the least even to the greatest. They spared neither sex nor age, destroying together with them those women of their own nation who had consented to intermix with the Danes, and the children who had sprung from that foul adultery. Some women had their breasts cut off, others were buried alive in the ground, while the children were dashed to pieces against posts and stones. The Danes themselves were so utterly destroyed that there survived no one to tell what had been done, with the single exception of 12 young men who escaped from the slaughter in London and, fleeing to the Thames, threw themselves into a small boat and, seizing the oars, quickly rowed themselves out of sight, and when they came to the sea coast they exchanged it for a ship. Then we scroll down to page 560. It says, meanwhile, the report of the massacre of the Danes had stirred not only the regions mentioned above, but also all those in the neighborhood of England. For men, not taking into account the sufferings which the English had sustained at the hands of the Danes, held their slaughter to be a most unholy deed. None, therefore, of his allies would arm to aid him. This is talking about him being Ethelred. Nay, even those who, like the Normans, were allied to King Ethelred by the tie of marriage, gave him no help. That is a Christian historian who, while it was 200 years after the fact, says essentially the same thing that the 1050 account said, but with much more detail. And it's recorded in record. Not only were the Danes cleaner and better kempt, they were also massacred in a most brutal fashion. Now, why wouldn't the bodies be found? They dug up a couple graves and they found some bodies of fighting men. That would make sense if the women were taking the children and trying to escape to safety, and the men were going to be attempting to defend their escape. Then it would make sense that the men would be the ones that would be found on land. But what else makes sense? It was bath day. It was Saturday. They would all be down by the river, by the Thames, by any body of water. They could have just been drowned and floated downriver and out to sea. There's a multitude of reasons. Are you going to believe the earliest account of 1050 that it actually happened, and then a church historian that this happened in the most brutal way? And not only did it happen in the most brutal way, but the king's people afterwards declared it a most unholy event and would not back him up. Now, Svein Forkbeard was the king of Denmark at the time, and he did retaliate, and his son Canute ended up taking over many of the parts of England. But that's maybe a video for another time. Anyway, that's the problem when you have a false god in play. He doesn't give rights. These rights are inherent to our life, to our freedom. And these are the things that result from a false god being in play. People are brutalized, and then false histories are written to cover it up. Anyways, that's the end of the video. Until next time, or tills nästa gång. Good health.